Welcome to this explainer. Today we're zooming in on the final, completely unprecedented decade in the life of a man who literally built a nation. We're talking about the years 1789 to 1799. This is George Washington. But, not the general out there leading troops through the freezing snow. No, this is Washington taking on the ultimate burden of power. I mean, he had already won the Revolutionary War. He could have just stayed home at Mount Vernon and called it a day. But instead, he was called back to lead a fragile, brand-new republic. So in this explainer, we're going to explore exactly how he navigated a role that literally had never existed before, look at the fierce rivalries that threatened to completely tear the young country apart, and dive into the monumental decisions that defined his legacy forever.
Picture this. It's April 30th, 1789. We're in New York City, which was actually the first capital of the United States. George Washington steps out onto the balcony of Federal Hall, places his hand on a Bible, and takes the oath as the very first president of the United States. And below him, just an enormous crowd. Thousands of Americans are packed into the streets, all straining just to get a glimpse of the man who won their independence. The historical sources tell us that the second the oath was complete, the crowd erupted. The cheering was so incredibly loud that witnesses literally said it shook the air itself. And in that moment, Washington's eyes actually filled with tears. He was stepping into a total void, knowing, as he put it, that he was walking on untrodden ground. There was no map, no instruction manual for what a president was actually supposed to be. Every single thing he was about to do would be a first.
So, what was his biggest challenge right out of the gate? Building the American presidency completely from scratch. Think about it for a second. Because there had never been a president before, every single move he made set a precedent. How exactly should a president handle foreign policy? What's the right relationship between the executive branch and the legislature? Who does he even talk to for advice? Washington didn't answer these questions by sitting around reading political theory. He answered them through action, and remarkably, through immense restraint. He went ahead and established the cabinet system of advisors. He dealt with Congress in a way that totally respected their power while still asserting his own. He was basically inventing the presidency day by day, holding on to this unwavering commitment that the office was designed to serve the people, not the other way around.
Now, to actually help him run this brand new country, Washington gathered the most brilliant and, frankly, combative minds in America. On one side, you've got Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State. Jefferson was a huge champion of the common farmer, firmly believed in the sovereignty of individual states, and was deeply, deeply suspicious of a centralized government. On the exact opposite side of the spectrum sat Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton was all about strong central banking, rapid industrial growth, and building a highly powerful federal government. I mean, they disagreed on nearly everything and openly despised each other on a personal level. Yet, and here's the crazy part, both of their visions contained elements that this young republic desperately needed just to survive.
So how do you handle that explosive dynamic? Well, Washington managed it by becoming the ultimate anchor. Just picture Jefferson and Hamilton arguing furiously across the cabinet table. Washington was the guy holding them both in check, a lot of times with just a raised hand. He maintained this absolute, rock-solid refusal to pick sides. He didn't just align himself with Jefferson's agrarian vision, but he also didn't just hand the keys to the country over to Hamilton's banking system. He held these two brilliant, totally opposing minds together through sheer force of character and fairness. He knew that a brand new nation simply could not afford to be immediately torn apart by factionalism. His neutrality was the glue that kept the whole government functioning during its most vulnerable early years.
So he successfully navigates that incredibly tense first term in 1789, and he secures re-election in 1792. But it's what happened in 1796 that truly changed the world. In 1796, Washington made a revolutionary decision. He refused a third term. You have to understand that people would have handed it to him by acclamation. Nobody was going to challenge George Washington. He could have been president for life. He basically could have been a king in practice, if not in name. But he said no. He chose to step down, voluntarily surrendering power and establishing a tradition of a two-term limit that would hold unbroken for the next 150 years.
And before packing up and leaving, he penned his farewell address. It's essentially a roadmap, packed with these incredibly prescient warnings from a leader who could clearly see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He warned the nation to beware the baneful effects of the spirit of party, knowing full well from those chaotic cabinet meetings exactly how deep partisan divides could tear a community apart with ill-founded jealousies. He explicitly warned against foreign entanglements, urging the country to completely avoid foreign influence and corruption. He pleaded with Americans to guard the Constitution with everything they had. But above all, his central message was about self-determination. Let the people govern themselves, always. These definitely weren't just the parting words of a retiring politician. They were a survival guide for the Republic.
After stepping down, Washington finally got exactly what he wanted, to head back to his beloved Mount Vernon and just live as a private citizen. But sadly, his retirement was incredibly brief. On December 13, 1799, the 67-year-old leader was out riding his horse around his estate in this awful, cold, wet weather. He comes back home with a severe throat infection, and the illness progressed rapidly. And to make matters worse, his doctors, basically just following the standard medical practices of the time, bled him repeatedly. It's a really tragic irony that the greatest medical minds of that era, in their desperate attempt to save him, essentially sped up his demise. That drastic treatment only made an already sick man significantly weaker. By the evening of December 14th, it became painfully clear to everyone in the room that George Washington was in his final hours.
You know, he faced the very end of his life with the exact same stoic calm he had brought to every military and political crisis he'd ever faced. Surrounded by his doctors and his secretary, Tobias Lear, Washington lay in bed, his breathing slowing down. His wife, Martha, sat right beside him, holding his hand. He opened his eyes, and his final words were barely above a whisper, but peaceful and totally certain. "'Tis well." When the news of his death finally spread, it triggered this massive wave of global grief. Over in America, from Boston down to Philadelphia and New York, church bells rang entirely through the night. But that respect went way beyond America's borders. Even Napoleon Bonaparte ordered 10 days of mourning throughout France, and the British Royal Navy, the exact same force he had defeated, actually lowered its flags in respect.
Now, we have to look at the total reality here. George Washington wasn't just a myth carved in marble. He was a human being. And like all people, he carried profound human flaws. Yes, George Washington is universally known as the father of a nation, and his world-changing greatness is absolutely undeniable. But to truly understand him, we can't just look at the statues or the grand portraits. We have to look at the total reality of his life, balancing the extraordinary things he actually achieved against the realities of the time he lived in and the very real personal choices he made.
300. That is the number of people George Washington enslaved at his Mount Vernon estate. This is a stark, undeniable moral failure that history must never overlook or minimize. While he was out there fighting a revolution for the unalienable rights of free men and dedicating his life to building a republic based entirely on liberty, he was simultaneously denying that exact same liberty to hundreds of human beings. In an explainer dedicated to facts, it's absolutely crucial we state this plainly. He was a man of immense contradictions. He fought his entire life to control a pretty fierce temper, he made his fair share of military mistakes, and his participation in the institution of slavery remains a deep, permanent shadow over his legacy.
Yet, when we step back and contrast those flaws with his historical triumphs, we arrive at one defining truth. He chose the Republic. Twice. Think about this. In all of recorded human history, it is incredibly rare for a single person to secure ultimate, unchecked power and then just voluntarily walk away from it. Washington did it 2 separate times. First, right after the Revolutionary War in 1783, when he resigned his military commission instead of using the army to seize power. And second, in 1796, when he outright refused a third term as president. He literally could have held absolute power forever. Instead, he made the world-changing decision to hand it right back to the people. It really leaves us with this huge question to chew on. When absolute power was right there for the taking, what did he choose? He could have been a king. He chose to be a citizen. He could have demanded lifelong loyalty to himself. Instead, he demanded loyalty to the Constitution. That simple, totally unprecedented decision is the exact reason his face is still on our dollar today. It's why the capital of the nation bears his name, not because he was perfect, and certainly not because he was without deep, profound flaws, but because in the absolute most critical moments, when history offered him an empire, he chose the Republic, every single time. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.